Okay, welcome everyone to the March event for the Central Safety Group. I'm the Vice President of the Central Safety Group and standing in today for Nan, who is still joining us, but outside of her usual environment. So I've stepped in to assist today. Just a couple of things before we start. Life member Kevin Jones from the Safety at Work blog has made a very generous offer to the group in recognition of our 60th anniversary. He's offering a 12-month free subscription to his blog for all financial members, and details will be emailed out to everyone in the next 24 to 48 hours or so. So again, we thank Kevin for that very generous offer, which I think will be well received by members. Some housekeeping for today before we move on and introduce our speaker. Try and remain on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions, use the chat function and we'll circle back to them later on. And there should be time after the presentation for some questions. So without further ado, I'll introduce Pam. She's an internationally recognised specialist in OHS capability and related aspects of OHS professionally. She's currently responsible for the development and ongoing maintenance of the Australian OHS body of knowledge, which is referred to as BOK. BOK is the collective works developed by a range of specialists that informs OHS education, certification, and further development of OHS professionals. And there's a link to that, which is www.ohsbok.org.au for those of you who I'm sure would have some further interest in that. Her work with the International Network of Safety and Health Professionals developing the OHS Professional Capability Framework earned Pam the 2017 and 18 President's Award from the American Society of Safety Professionals. In 2018, she was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for her contribution to OHS professionals through her leadership and advisory roles, particularly in developing standards. So incredibly well credentialed, and we warmly welcome you, Pam, and we'll listen avidly with interest to what you have to share with us today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Frank. I really think I need to chop down some of the bio stuff as we get older and we keep adding bits to it. It gets a bit long and lengthy, but thank you very much. So Jane contacted me and asked me if I would present today talking about the role of the OHS professional. And some of the comments that she made and we discussed was perhaps the issues around uncertainty about what our role is, how our role's changing, and what are the factors that are driving that, and how we might deal with it. So it's an area that I'm fairly passionate about and really keen to make help the discussion along the way. And I think it's a discussion. There's no absolute outcomes. There's no right, wrong answer, whatever. So I'm going to trust to luck and technology and share my screen, which I hope you can now see the title slide from the presentation. So what I want to, as I mentioned, talk about today is our job. And the fact that it's changing, and some of the things that are changing that, COVID, as we all know, the elements around wellness, psychological health and safety, and a number of other things that are happening, that how do we incorporate that into our role? And finishing on a positive note, I certainly want to talk about what's out there to help us navigate the changes. Now, we're really going to push technology here, and we're going to try a poll. So what I want us to think about, or what I want you to tell me about first off, is how you feel about your job today. So Marina, can we put the poll up? And so I've picked some words, and I realise that it's putting words in your mouth, but this was the only way we could manage the poll side of things. So I want you to pick one word that is the closest to how you feel about your job today. Optimistic, valued, confident, focused, perhaps uncertain, perhaps a bit pessimistic, perhaps challenged. Do you feel undervalued, overworked, or overwhelmed? I know they're fairly loaded words, but just give us a feel about how you feel about your job. Pick one word, tick it, and then press submit. And then hopefully Marina will be able to give us a view of how people feel. And just as a reminder, it is anonymous. We won't know who's ticked what box, but ideally we'll get a bit of a feel about the group.
We've got 15 of 18, I think, because I'm in there twice and there's you, and maybe okay. I know someone's on the phone, so I think we'll say 15 is a good number.
A good number. And what do we get? What does it tell us?
Share results.
Excellent. Okay, and sort of as I expected, we've got a range. So valued, confident comes up there. Bit of a weighting towards challenged or undervalued. A few people feel uncertain about how they feel or about the job. A few of you feel confident and focused. So there's a good range, but there is that underlying feeling there that perhaps the undervalued, perhaps challenged. So let's close that poll. And hopefully we can keep the information there somewhere. So let's then move on. And given that we've got that feeling, the other part of it I want to explore is who do we work for? Do we work for workers? Do we work for the managers? Do we have these competing priorities, and how is that impacting upon how we might feel? Do we feel we're being tugged in different directions? So that then takes us a bit more to our job. You know, there's all these bits that some of us have in our job, not everything for us. You know, we've got safety, we've got health, sits in most people's titles. Some people have environment tacked onto their job. Some of you have elements of occupational hygiene in your job, perhaps. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is the well-being tacked onto our job. What does that mean, and how does it set us up? Some of you have probably got security attached to your title, perhaps quality. You're expected to have a bit of ergonomic knowledge. And then we've got this elephant in the room, if you like, which is psychological health and safety. Where do we sit with that? And how does that affect all of us? So I want to ask you how you feel about this, about your job. And we've got all of this, but then we've also got the elements of, so what of those things that have been in the blue bubbles, what's in your job? So Marina, if we can put up the poll again, I want to get a bit of an idea about the scope and the range of what you're dealing with. Now, this is in your title. Do you have safety in your title? Do you have health, well-being or wellness? You can tick as many words as you like. Environment, security, emergency, quality, or something else that I haven't mentioned there. So this time you can click more than one word. So tell us about what's in your title.
Just got a couple more to answer. Okay, that's 15. We'll end it there.
So pretty much everyone's got safety in their job. Health, so safety was 87%, health 67%. So some people are just safety. Well-being starting to sneak in there with 27%. Environment 13%. Interestingly, nobody in this group has security in their title. A few people have emergency. Now, mind you, we're just talking title. Some of you might be dealing with these things even though they're not in your title. Quality, we've got 20%, and something else, which I haven't listed there, 27%. So if we go back to that, are we being pulled in different directions for who we work for? Here, are we being pulled in different directions because of all the areas that we're supposed to be covering? And each of these areas have their own body of knowledge, if you like, and their own skills about what we're expected to do. So it's not unreasonable if people are feeling challenged, overwhelmed, not sure, uncertain about their job, because of these things that seem to keep getting tacked on to health, safety, and whatever else. So that's sort of just exploring what our job is about and what is expected of us. And so title is one thing. If we actually went down to position descriptions, we'd probably find a whole lot more things. The other thing which comes about in our roles is what's attached to our title. What's the descriptor? Are you a coordinator? Are you a manager? Are you an advisor? Are you a consultant? Are you an officer? And one of the things that I find is now appearing in job titles is business partner. So here again, it might be, and it's not always related to a hierarchy of levels of jobs. So if you're called a manager, do you actually manage? If you're a coordinator, are you actually coordinating, and what does that mean? And as I mentioned, this business partner one, and it's appearing more and more in job positions. And what's the implications behind that? And I think that also raises this question that we've mentioned before about who do we work for? And this might be me because of the ethical side of health and safety that I'm really interested in. But if you're called a business partner, does that raise any potential conflict of priorities or ethics? Because it's implying or strengthening the attitude or the connection we have with our business. And does that allow us to still equally advocate for worker safety? That's a rhetorical question. I'm just throwing it in there for you to think about. But here we have health and safety, and I just picked this advertisement list because I was interested in the advisor, coordinator, manager, partner, etc. We've already just explored that it's not always just health and safety. So there's that side of our job and where we're going. So out of interest, let's just have another look at what your title says. Does your title call you a manager, a coordinator, an officer, an advisor, a consultant, perhaps a business partner, or something else again? So only one word this time, and let's tell us how your job describes you and, sorry, describes your role. So let's see what sort of outcomes we get here.
A few people haven't answered, but oh, we've got some now. I think people are thinking about, what am I called? Okay. That's about it. Got 14 respondents.
That'll do. So that's interesting. 36% manager, 21% coordinators, 14% officers, 7% advisors, 14% consultant, and a few business partners are sneaking in there. And we haven't got any others that have indicated. So we won't explore today, but I wanted to leave it in your mind. If that's the descriptor that's attached to your job, is that what you're really doing? And is that what is being expected of you? And if you want to change your role a bit, how is that going to impact upon you? So are you conceived by the organisation as a manager, or are you conceived as an officer? And does that change how people perceive you? If you're a consultant or an advisor, how does that change how people see your role? And then this one about business partner. So I think it's an interesting thing to keep in your mind. And if you're not happy with how people are perceiving you, is it time to have a discussion about a change of descriptor in your title? Just something to throw in there to think about. So, however we think about it, however we're described, things are changing. The nature of work is changing. What's expected of us is changing. There's a whole lot of drivers about this change. So what I want to do now is have a little bit of an exploration about some of the things that we know have driven change in the last 2 years, probably. So let's have a look at COVID. So last 2020, right at the beginning of COVID, we did some work on the body of knowledge on writing a chapter about workers working from home. And we did a survey of OHS professionals and practitioners about how they were adapting and their organisation was adapting to COVID and all the changes to work. We also did a series of interviews with OHS professionals, which informed the development of that chapter about working from home. So these are just a few of the things that now have come out around COVID, and none of it's groundbreaking because we've been dealing with it for 2 years. But just in relation to COVID, you've got COVID as a hazard. You've also got managing the health and safety of workers who are working from home. And okay, we're now going into a hybrid arrangement, probably in a lot of cases, but we've still got this issue around managing health and safety of those working from home. So we've also got the psychological issues of psychological health and safety related to working from home. And one of the things that when we did the surveys in the early days, very much was the issue of anxiety around COVID. Now, whether that you feel that still exists and that's still something that's got to be managed, but as different from the psychological health and safety of the nature of working from home, there was the anxiety issues around COVID. And then as it was mentioned in the introduction, is around there's some things you just can't manage if you've got to work from home. So managing workplace hazards and health and safety when you're not able to be on site. And even now we're going back to the workplace. If you've got some distributed sites, you might not be able to visit them all, or if they're in different states, it presents problems. So COVID's given us a whole new set of challenges, and we're being expected to just turn around and manage those things. So that's one set of issues that we're dealing with. Related to COVID, I think, it was always coming, but is this emphasis on well-being? And some of you mentioned that you had well-being in your title. I've got to confess, I didn't write down how many said that. But even without well-being in your title, it's something that's being added to our role. But on February the 19th, I went on Seek for 15 minutes. And out of that, these were some of the jobs that popped up. And so well-being is very much becoming an expected part of the health and safety role. So my question now is how, I mean, this is just being attached to the role, and it's probably become attached to your role even within the workplace. Your title may or may not have it in there, or else they've just decided to add it to your title because well-being is an issue and we better be seen as dealing with it. So how do you feel about that? Is well-being separate and different to health if you've got health in your role or your title? So is it reasonable to just tack it onto our role? Or is it a whole new different set of knowledge and skills? And I'm also interested in whether we're getting this well-being requirement and do we have any background to do it? So I want to ask you the question of, have you received any training in supporting well-being? And how do you feel equipped to take on a well-being role? So Marina's put up the poll. So if you can answer yes, no, or not sure to each of the four questions, I think it'll be really interesting to see how we feel about this well-being business being added to our role. So if you can just flick through those, the questions are, is well-being separate and different to health? Yes, no, or not sure. Is it reasonable to just add well-being to health and safety roles? Yes, no, not sure. Have you received any training in supporting well-being? Yes, no, not sure. And have we got a fourth question there, Marina? Oh, yes.
Yep,
scroll down.
Scroll down, yep.
Do you feel equipped to take on a well-being role? Whether you've got it in your role currently or not, do you feel equipped to take on a well-being role? Yes, no, or not sure.
And Pam, just to answer your question before from the previous poll about how many had it in their titles, it was 27%.
Okay, so it's becoming significant enough for people in this group, and my guess is it's going to become more prevalent as time goes by. And even if it's not in your title, it's probably being attached somehow to your position description.
Okay, I'll share the results now. Again, need to scroll down.
Okay.
Results.
So is well-being separate and different to health? 60% of you think it's yes. Think yes, it is separate and different to health. Is it reasonable to just add well-being to health and safety roles? 67% say no, 20% say not sure. Have you received any training in supporting well-being? Interestingly, 53% of you say yes, 47% say no. And I think that is interesting. It would be, if we were able to explore what sort of training that is. So not today, but I am pleased, perhaps a little surprised, that over half of you feel you've got some training in the wellbeing area. And do you feel equipped to take on a wellbeing role? 33%. So even though 53% of you have had some training, only 33% of you feel equipped to take on a wellbeing role. 40% say no, 27% not sure. So I think that is really, really interesting. And so it's something that in the end, I want to talk about how the AOHS might come in and give support also in some of those areas. So moving along then, with the other side of things is psychological health and safety, or in some cases it keeps appearing as PH&S. And I've got to confess, I keep thinking it's a typo when I see PH&S, and have to keep reminding myself that this is an acronym that has come up. So with psychological health and safety, and I'll use the word bombarded, because if you're on LinkedIn or you're on Twitter or you're reading any other thing, it just seems health and safety has just become psychological health and safety. My concern is that we also need to keep addressing the physical health and safety side of things as well. The other side of it is toolkits that keep popping up. Here's a handy toolkit to help you manage health and safety. And then if you're in Victoria, we've got the new legislation. If you're in some of the other states, some of the codes of practice that are coming out. And the other concern, I think, with psychological health and safety that the AOHS had is that in a lot of cases, it seems to move away from what we've been educated with for years about a hierarchy of control. And with psychological health and safety, it often seems to go back to the individual. So I think people who have a health and safety background have a real responsibility and a real potential to influence in making the approaches more organisational. I think the other aspect that we're all dealing with in the psychological health and safety side of things is the language. And I'd like to introduce later on the AOHS position statement. But is it psychological health and safety, or is it mental health? Are they two different things? Are they the same thing? So we've got a whole lot of issues here that come under psychological health and safety that as health and safety professionals, we need to deal with. So late last year, the AOHS had an opportunity to engage with research that in the University of Queensland about the health and safety professionals' role in psychological health and safety. And one of their research students, Ashley Graff, conducted the research, and she interviewed 38 health and safety professionals about how they felt and what their issues were in relation to psychological health and safety and our role in managing it. So the opinions that came out of those interviews, and this is our peer group talking, that they saw psychological health and safety as complex, not well defined, confused with mental health, felt there was no right solution, and that may be the case, but that means how how do we manage it if there's no perceived right solution? Different to what we've been educated with for so many years, is about being proactive. In psychological health and safety, what's being done at the moment tends to be reactive rather than proactive, with a focus on individuals rather than the organisation. So this was some of the issues that came out in those interviews. And when those professionals were asked, how do you feel about your role in psychological health and safety? The words that for them came out was confused, daunted, overwhelmed, particularly in dealing with individuals that might be having issues. There was a fear that they might make the situation worse, or in hindsight, guilt that they could have done better. Certainly unsure about role and boundaries. And the other side of it was being caught in the middle between the affected person and the senior manager. How do we deal with this? And also the issues about power and influence and the role of HR and senior managers not being on board, the issues around organisational culture, perhaps. So this was what came out, and we only got the research early January by the time it had all been written up. So one of the things that the AIHS is looking at, and the body of knowledge, is how can we address this in some way? And I think it's perhaps not going to be helped by the legislation, but we're all going to have to get our head around those sorts of things. So the other side of, if we look at, it may appear that I'm sort of presenting a very negative view so far, but I'm trying to be realistic. And so we have a new chapter in the body of knowledge, which is called the OHS Professional International and Australian Perspectives. And what some of the research that has come out around the OHS professional role have been these sort of issues, that there's a lack of role clarity. And I think we've identified that through this discussion. We've got a broadening role. The other aspect of it is what was called disciplinary ambiguity. So people who come into health and safety might come from a health background. They might come from an engineering background. They might come from a trade background. They might come from a business background. And so what are we? And so that disciplinary ambiguity is seen as a real problem for us as professionals. The other issue seems to be that people bring whatever that background is to their job. And so they have quite different approaches depending on what their background is. A lot of you might have read David Proven's work that he's done around professional identity of the health and safety professional. But that and also other work indicates that we don't have a lot of professional identity. You know, if you say in a social environment, oh, I'm a health and safety manager, you can probably get a range of responses to that, from, oh, okay, you're a policeman in the workplace, are you? To having no comprehension about your role. The other side of it is we don't have any entry to practice requirements, and we don't have any defined knowledge base. Although we've got the body of knowledge, there's nothing that actually says, in order to work in this job, you need to know X, Y, Z. You know, if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, there is a very clearly defined knowledge base. We don't have that. And so that doesn't help us in having our professional identity. The other thing which came up, we were doing a body of knowledge chapter on ethics and OHS practice. And one of the people that was advising and helping us write the chapter was an ethicist for accountants. And she made the comment that the accountants all work towards a global code of ethics. Every accountancy body in the world, every professional body, has signed on to a global code of ethics. We don't have that in health and safety. When we tried to look at an internationally agreed code of ethics, when we looked at the bodies in the US, in Canada, UK, Australia, Europe, whatever, it was all different. And trying to get them to actually agree wasn't looking feasible. So while we have, the AHS has a code of ethics, the hygienists and the ergos all have a code of ethics, which generally are in the same direction. They have their variations. So these are some of the issues that we face as a profession, which I think we need to be talking about. How do we bring it all together, and how do we address some of these things over time? So I think I've been a bit negative up until now. What I'd like to do is to get us to take a bit of a positive approach and see where we can go to. So we were involved in a series of professional papers, peer-reviewed papers in safety science. And David Proven and I wrote one on the OHS profession in Australia. And this was the conclusion that we came to. We had to address, was OHS a profession in Australia according to 8 criteria? And we asked other countries in the world to do the same thing. So from Australia, we came to the conclusion that the OHS profession in Australia is an emerging profession. We're not yet fully considered a profession. So an emerging profession is one that it is a recognised discipline or occupation that has established, although not consistently implemented, the structures, capability and recognition necessary to be considered an established profession. So I see that as a fairly positive statement. We're on the way. We've identified we've got some issues, and so we need to work out how we can deal with those issues, contribute to them, get some change going. Okay, I guess the classic word is change. Love it or fear it, we've got it. If we can look to say, yes, OHS profession is changing, instead of finding it threatening, let's look at where we can go with this. Let's take a positive look at the challenges. So the first one is, and I'm going to talk about the body of knowledge, because I think there's some positive things there, which I would think, given that I manage the body of knowledge. But the comments that you had about health and wellbeing, in some people's views, being different. We've written a new chapter in the body of knowledge that looks at health. What is health? How do we think about it? And so looking at the research and looking at the peer-reviewed literature and where things are going in the thinking, what we've done in that chapter is present a biopsychosocial model of health. And that's not our word we've thought up. There's a lot of discussion around in psychology about biopsychosocial. And what that does, and what this graphic is supposed to describe, is that health has physical elements, it has psychological elements, and it has social elements. And all of those need to be considered if we're talking about health. So if you were doing that, then you can only be healthy if you are looking at all of those things together. So in that chapter, we present the position that well-being is not a separate function, but if we think about health as being a holistic concept and take this biopsychosocial approach, well-being is integrated with psychosocial, with physical, and with the social side of things. And so then it can very much be considered part of the health and safety professional's role. And so if we stick with this view of health and well-being, then we have some protective factors and risk factors around this view of health. And the ones that came up in the research were particularly around job design, team and groups, organisational factors, home and work boundaries, and then some individual factors that are going to affect the physical, psychosocial and social. The other element of this different view of health is that health is not, you're either healthy or not healthy. The older view of health was around disease. What we propose in this chapter on health is that health is a continuum. And so you can sit somewhere on that continuum, and where you sit on that continuum may well be different days, different conditions, whatever. So if we take a bit of a closer look at this biopsychosocial, and I know this is a lot of words on a slide, but the thing about this model, the power of the model, is the fact that we're saying physical, psychological and social elements are integrated. And so that they need to be integrated to support optimal functioning of workers. So the model implies a shift from traditional problem-solving OHS approach to a broader, more positive, proactive, value-added approach that can be mainstreamed as part of normal business. It can also be reflected in organisational values. There's a symbiotic relationship between worker health, well-being and organisational effectiveness. So the OHS professional has an important role to play in ensuring that productivity is balanced with this psychosocial safety climate that prioritises health and well-being. So the OHS professional very much has a role in this view of health and well-being by placing it from the organisational side of things. And I'm not going to play it, but I've just put this shot in here because Genevieve Hawkins has interviewed the author of the OHS Body of Knowledge chapter on health. It's about 30 minutes, I think, but it's a very engaging discussion on this view of health. And I think it would be interesting for you to have a look at it. And you might even find that to look at it with some of your managers then can provoke some interesting discussion. So have a listen to it when you're in the car if you like, but there's the video there as well, and it's a very engaging interview and very easy to listen to. So that's a view of health, which also integrates wellness and psychological health and safety as well. On the psychological health and safety side of things, last year we felt that the AIHS felt that we needed to write a position paper. There was a lot of discussion around where health and safety people fitted. One of the huge challenges was around language. And so if you have a look at this position paper on the AIHS website, I didn't put the full link in because it's a very, very long link. But if you go to the website and Google position paper, you should find it. But that position paper clearly says that there is a role for OHS professionals in psychological health and safety. And it clearly says how we can do this. And the important things like around consistent language, the primary importance of good work design, and whatever you're looking at, you know, this good work design side of things is really important, and that's where we can play a role. Ensuring that us and others have role clarity around psychological health and safety, and being able to work as part of a multidisciplinary team. Part of the big problem, I think, with psychological health and safety is whose role is it? Is it HR? You know, is the organisation bringing in psychologists? All of those people have a role, and we need to have some role clarity. So we can talk a bit briefly later on about role clarity and your way you can do that by asking questions, etc. Briefly, from the AIHS's point of view, they have their capability agenda with the body of knowledge. We have accreditation of university courses, role clarity very much around the global capability framework and the body of knowledge. Then there's certification and certainly the CPD outlooks. So just throw that one in there that the AHS is doing quite a bit of work around role clarity areas as well. So briefly mentioning the body of knowledge and where we come from with that. So with the body of knowledge, we have a story about work and health and safety. So we say that work impacts upon safety and health of humans. We need to understand the humans and work safety and health. So humans work in organisations. We need to understand the dynamics of organisations and how they work. But organisations operate in socio-political contexts and environments of which they're affected by. So we also need to think about systems side of things, and we also need to think about the whole range of hazards that we're dealing with in the workplace that must be under control in order to minimise risk. And to do that, we need to understand causation factors. So we've got this story about health and safety and knowledge, but we need the practice. And it's the practice that makes all of these things hang together. And just briefly with the body of knowledge, we use this story because you can't go to one chapter in the body of knowledge and get all your answers. You need to be able to delve into different bits to design a strategy, solve a problem. You need to understand your organisations. You need to understand your humans and your people. You need to understand the hazards. So we've got a bit going for us. And we also need to believe that we have some control. There is an activity, if you like, called job crafting. And it's came about, and we particularly talk about it in the chapter on the OHS Professional, International and Australian Perspectives. We also mention it in the new chapter that's coming up on work design. But the concept of job crafting is enabling people to customise and redesign their jobs by actively changing their tasks and interactions with others at work. Now, you might say, I can't do that because, I'm controlled by what happens at work. But let's think a bit positively about it. And with job crafting, they say there's 3 ways you can go, or 3 areas you can look at. So it's about the relations that you have in the workplace. It's about the tasks you do, and it's about the cognitive or the thinking things you have to do. And the things there that you can think about is about promotion-focused job crafting. That is expanding my role, moving into perhaps a different role. The other prevention side of it is, well, I got things that really, really I hate doing or stress me no end in my job. Is there ways I can do less of that? So it's the enhancement growing stuff, and then it's the what can I do to identify the things that really stress me out or I don't like doing. So this comes out of some of the research on job crafting. Not going to go into it in a lot of detail, but currently the AHS is developing training in job crafting for OHS professionals, and that's going to be launched in the not too distant future. So keep your eye out for it, whether you're a member or not of the AHS, but there's some really practical guidance about how to tweak your job if there's things that you don't like about it. So a little bit more about what's out there very briefly. There's the Global Capability Framework, which comes from INCHPO, and that's about to go into a review and updating. It was launched in 2017. Also on the INCHPO website is a literature review about the value proposition for the occupational health and safety professional. Part of the problem there is we just don't have the research, but you might find it interesting reading. Then I mentioned the body of knowledge many times. So the sorts of, and while we've got a whole number of chapters around that structure that I went to before, I think given what we've been talking about so far today, the design of work chapter, which is about to be released in the next few months, we've already got chapters on psychosocial hazards, fatigue, bullying and violence. So around that psychological health and safety stuff, there's very much some good support there. And around our role, I've mentioned the chapter, the generalist OHS Professional, International and Australian Perspectives, and the chapter on ethics. It's a long chapter, the one on ethics, but there's not been anything else written about health and safety and professional practice and ethics. So have a read of that. And it might even be something that the safety group considers having a discussion around. If people read the chapter, and let's have a structured discussion around ethics and the issues that are raised in that chapter. Happy to chair a discussion around that down the track, if that's something that you want to do. So at this stage, I'm happy to answer any questions, comments, whatever. And then I'd like to finish off with one last poll just before we close. So Frank, have you got any comments that you would like to make at this stage?
No, just general ones, Pam. I guess that it's interesting that you've brought in the biopsychosocial model and understood the importance of that within the construct of wellness. It's certainly something that has been known in the health sort of related industries for a long period of time, and is well accepted as a standard of practice now, in which we kind of measure health and well-being. And I think it's important that it's recognised and incorporated into the health and sort of safety aspect, which you've done quite well. And I think that's going to be a growing and emerging theme that will dictate to some extent the body of work that we do, and particularly within the context of the acknowledgement, I guess, and recognition of psychological health and functioning within the pandemic, which has sort of brought that to the fore. And if we weren't acutely aware of it, we certainly are now. So I think to some extent your talk is really a preface to the trend of where OH&S professionalism is going to go, and the subset of skills that we probably, if we haven't already begun to development, need to probably think about focusing on. So no, I think it's a very relevant and timely presentation, which I suspect has been very well received by the audience. Do we have questions that people have raised? And if you do have a question, then I'd ask that you put your video on so that we can see you as you ask the question of Pam.
Or just even comments if people want to make a comment.
Yeah.
If it's not a question.
I'd just like to say that the ethics conversation you just brought up, I think we'd be very interested in having a session on that. I know in the committee we've discussed that as a topic, so that would be wonderful.
So what perhaps while people are thinking about their questions, I would like Marina, if we can do that last poll, which I wanted to finish on a positive note, hopefully, and just do a check-in, if you like, about how people are feeling now about their job. We asked how you were feeling today with that word right back at the beginning. So while you're thinking about any questions, just give us your thoughts about how you feel about your job going forward. Do you feel ambitious, optimistic, motivated, confident, secure, perhaps uncertain, perhaps cautious, challenged, pessimistic, anxious? And I realise that they're very, very loaded words, and we were limited to 10. Initially, I put a whole lot more in, and then Marina got back to me and said, you can only have 10. Which ones do you want? So as close as you can, give us your thoughts about how you feel now. I hope I haven't made you all pessimistic.
Got a couple more still to come in. Okay, I think that's the best we're going to get there.
A mixture. So 14% of you are ambitious, 29% are optimistic, and 29% are motivated. Good outcome. 21% are confident, 7% feel secure, uncertain, nobody, cautious, fair enough, 14%, and challenged, 29%. So there, hang on, I just missed one. Pessimistic and anxious, nobody. So that is a really good outcome. I'm feeling that that's okay. So I feel that hopefully I haven't made you sort of get a negative view of life. I would like to suggest to you to have a look at the body of knowledge if you haven't already done so. It's free access to anybody who's interested in health and safety. It is written and targeting professionals. So it is written in a style that we believe professionals should be prepared to read, very much referenced and evidence-based. And there is, I think we're up to about 50 chapters. And as I mentioned, it's not the sort of thing that you start at chapter 1 and go to chapter 30 something, but you delve into them as there's things that interest you. But as an outcome of this discussion today, I really do recommend that you read chapter 3, which is around the OHS Professional, International and Australian perspectives.
Pam, a question's come through from David Trembert saying, when do you think time-wise the OHS profession will be recognised as a profession? 2 or 3 years?
Trust David Trembert to come up with the question of the era. I think it depends on who we're talking to. I think we've made huge leaps over the last few years. I think, you know, it's certainly partly because you've got to remember I'm biased because I worked on the development of the global capability framework. The other thing is, out of interest, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, is just starting a project that was around, they're looking at what's the minimum qualifications for people to practice in occupational health and safety. And I'm involved in working on that with Tristan Casey, who some people might know was at Griffith University. It's a little disappointing that the scope of that project has become narrowed and they're very much looking at developing countries. But I think that, you know, for an organisation like the ILO to be picking up the discussion around what's minimum qualifications, I think is a really great step. I think that the discussion that we're having is very healthy, but it depends upon all of us promoting things. And again, if you think about one of the criteria for a profession is controlled access to the profession, that not everybody can enter that profession unless they meet certain criteria. You know, we do have a certification process, whether it's the right one or not is open for discussion. We don't have any mandated legislated requirements, and there's a lot of pushback on that. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but there's a lot of people around who are uncomfortable about us achieving what's considered the requirements of a profession. So we've got a lot to deal with. And I think, again, our disciplinary ambiguity is a benefit in some ways, and it's also holding us back. So we need to think about how we embrace that and how we build that in. So, David, that's a non-answer to your question, but I think we have made huge leaps over the last, let's say, 5 years. And I think we just need to be able to keep moving forward. And the professional bodies are really, really important in that. And for those of you who don't know, David Trembert is the author of our Body of Knowledge chapter on MSDs, which was released late last year. And we're having discussions between the AHS and HAFISA about training around that chapter. So I think that's an example of professional maturity where two professional bodies can work together to get an outcome which shows, you know, how those disciplines can come together. So perhaps the other thing I would like to end on, which is around our topic of change and adaptation. I guess this is just a little plug for an advertisement. The AIHS National Conference this year, which is on in May, is titled The Adaptive Age, Innovative and Practical Approaches to Health and Safety. So I think we have matured a lot over the COVID eras, and I think we've shown how we can adapt and we can contribute to the discussion. So I do see some positive moves. Can't put a year or a whatever, David, but I think we are progressing, and I think that's really important. So
thanks for that, Pam.
Yep.
I just wanted to jump in because we only have a few more minutes to go and want to wrap up. But I think that a very well-informed and very relevant presentation from you. So again, I thank you on behalf of the Central Safety Group members for your time and for putting together that presentation. I would assume you were happy for it to be available to the membership who have been here and attended today, and they can obviously watch the video afterwards as well. We don't have any further questions, but again, thank you. It was very, very valuable. I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm sure that everyone else did as well. And I think we had a question there saying that a presentation on the ethics of our profession would be welcome in the future. And I think that's a very relevant topic as well. So look, we'll conclude the recording very shortly, but people are welcome to hang around a little bit afterwards if they'd like to network. And Pam has graciously indicated that she's comfortable to remain online as well if you would like to do so, to answer some questions and to make some comments, I guess. The recording will be available to the financial membership on the website afterwards. And just a reminder and a call out that our next session will be on Tuesday, the 12th of April, with further details to be forthcoming once they are all confirmed. So again, thank you, Pam, and we acknowledge and thank you for staying online a little bit beyond our finish time. And for those of you who can as well, then we welcome you to stay online for a short period of time. Thank you, everybody. And I think we can probably safely stop recording at this point, Marina.